Michael, you're going to have to write the book jacket.
Oh.
Yeah. It's a nice, small, intimate crowd with a bunch of friends. So, you used to be a rock musician, right? So, like, you know about, like, taking the new album out on the road a little bit and working out the kinks. And this is a kind of a newish talk, you know, where, so I'm still trying to work it out a little bit. The title is a little bit of a mouthful, you know, and most of what I'm going to try to do here tonight is try to make this weird title make sense. Okay, so like any kind of substrata, it's what you don't see, right? But the substrata is the stuff that ultimately has this profound influence on what you do end up seeing. So like if we're talking about the soil, it's the shit that's underground that then you end up seeing as plants and so on. But I think then the fictional realities that we live in, and I think that's a much easier case to make these days, that we're living amongst fictional realities than it used to be. That is post-Trump. You know, I think it's a much easier claim to make. But maybe the novelty here is underneath it. We say the disgusting phenomena we see every day in the media is taking root in something underneath, which is technological in nature. Okay, so this talk is primarily that. So some of you know what I've been up to over the last 18, 20 years. Some of you don't. So I'm going to just quickly go through some of the early stuff so you could just get a feel for why I end up where I am right now. So I like starting with this picture, you know, because it is a picture. It's something that's really burned into everybody's head. When I say Earth, you see this. Okay. Now, the thing to observe very closely, I think, is you're actually, when I say Earth, you're not seeing the Earth. You're seeing a famous photograph that's been published everywhere for the past 50 years. Okay. That's what's burned into you, a photograph, a very particular one. So this was a very interesting moment when the first machine was sent beyond the surface of the Earth. And that's what allowed us to be able to take a picture of it, you see. You know? So imagine a time living on this planet when we actually did not know what it looked like as a photograph. Okay. Many ecologists point to this as a seminal moment, this photograph from the Gemini mission, as being this kind of salient moment that just kind of organized the ecological movement. Yeah. Okay. Now, I followed that up with this one because of how it does not map very well onto that first photograph. So it turns out NASA has been collecting video footage for years from satellites. And around 5 years ago, they published it all in one loop. And it doesn't look like what you think the Earth looks like. It's an utterly electrified planet. Yeah. It's not that perfect blue marble that you might imagine. So this is more going back to earlier thinking. I was fascinated by machines like this because they're quite surprising. You know, in day-to-day life, it's hard to actually imagine how such things could be real. And I'm not surprised that there are conspiracy theories that we've never done things like this, that this is all a hoax, like we never went to the moon. because relative to the representations that surround us, it seems unlikely that we can do things like this. Now, what is this? This is a building that we launched into space. It's an architecture that we put into orbit. Right? Okay. And what allows this to happen is technological advancement, new machines that allows us to do things like this. One of the crucial inventions that led to Skylab was the solar panel. How many of us actually know how a solar panel works? You know, it's kind of an elegant invention, right? And then we end up doing things like this, and then they kind of trickle down to us in architecture on planet Earth. And then we end up with shit like this. And for me, this is like a very telling photograph, which situates what exactly is the mission, the general kind of banal mission of building design. What we call architecture is generally a delivery of a set of representations that dislocate history. So it's grafting a type of representation that belongs to some previous time, and then it kind of comes into collision with the reality of certain technologies. So just think of like a weird colonial house that looks like it was built in the 19th century with a Nest thermostat, right, or Wi-Fi in every room. You know, there's something utterly bizarre about the mismatch of technology with representation. Right? Then you might think, okay, well then maybe British high tech gets it right. Like we got to express that technology, but that becomes even more absurd because then it becomes a doubly complex removal from reality because now it's a kind of picture of technology that's different from the actual technology that's in it. The biggest problem with technology as it's evolving, and I think it's really coming to a head now, is it's becoming less and less optical. It's become more and more difficult to see. It's becoming more and more sublimated. Yeah. At least back then, this is already like 15 years ago, it then led to a lot of kind of never-ending series of studies and experiments into fabrication and modeling. And you remember when we were looking at weather modeling, you know, like we were just fascinated by just what we could do with technology. But still, these were all technologies that were still somewhat optical in nature. You know, it was not as removed from physical reality as things are now. Yeah, so I'm going very fast because for me this is like looking at baby pictures, and yeah. But I just want to communicate to you a kind of feel for this kind of history of looking at the virtualization of form making, and then the production in the real, like digital fabrication as it's still called, where it's like kind of trying to move the virtualized models into some sort of, you know, something you can touch, right? Yeah, on and on. It was endless, you know, and it was fun. Things started changing a little bit. Around the time I started getting sick and tired of working with things like 3D printers and milling machines and that stuff, I saw this article in the New York Times about a group of biologists in Brooklyn. They call themselves GenSpace, and they describe themselves as a community biotech lab. I thought, that's really weird, you know, and it was right down the street from Pratt's, so I immediately went there and just introduced myself to them. And we got into some interesting conversations, and it led to this project, which was a machine for depositing tissue culture, live tissue culture. Essentially a 3D printer for printing flesh. Yeah. There's a story I'll tell just as a kind of anecdote to this. Around this time I was very interested in Henrietta Lacks. Henrietta Lacks died in 1951. she went to the doctor one day with a tumor in her uterus. The doctor took a biopsy. Henrietta Lacks never returned. It turned out she had died and didn't have money to return, in fact. Much later, after she was already dead for a year, the doctor was clearing out all the tissue samples in the lab and discovered one petri dish that had something in it that he had never seen before. The tissue culture was still growing. It was still multiplying. This should not be happening. It's something that had never been seen before. He knew immediately the significance of it. It was immortalized cell culture. All cells, all biological cells have a kind of pre-programmed death. This one had a strange mutation where it just kept multiplying endlessly, as long as it had food, that is. Fast forward to about 10 years ago, there was finally some reporting on this. The HeLa tissue culture, spelled H-E-L-A, is kind of like the 8.5 by 11 ream of blank paper of biological laboratories. It's in every medical research lab on the planet. It's the most basic staple of genetic, viral, vaccine experiments. Yeah. It turns out every single one of these tissue cultures, the HeLa tissue cultures, are traceable back to this original tumor that was extracted from Henrietta Lacks' body. So, in some sense, whatever we want to frame as her biological reality, it exists on a planetary scale now. The story gets even stranger. The children ask very strange questions, like, for example, the daughter asks, does this mean my mom is still alive in some way? The older son wanted to get paid. Yeah. And so I tell the story because these are kind of surprising stories that we live with these technological realities. Yeah, so initially just kind of speculating, what do you do with a flesh printer, So this kind of being stuck in kind of previous ways of thinking. All right, let's make some weird thing with it. But then the reality of the tissue culture is much stranger. And during this project, I came to question a lot just the very distinction between medium and content that I operate with. That probably all of us operate with. Here, this is a little clip of that Times article I saw. This is Oliver Medvedik. He's the science director of GenSpace. He's still there. You could go visit him if you want. They joke that it's like having a gym membership. So you pay a fee and you can do bio experiments there. Oliver brought on to the team Nina Tandon, who had done a dissertation on heart tissues, on incubating heart tissue. So you could actually look her up. She has a video on YouTube from her dissertation where there's like a little postage stamp heart tissue that's wired up, that's beating. She's, since this project, has gone on to do a medical startup called EpiBone. One day, if you need a bone graft, they won't have to subject you to this horribly painful process of harvesting bone tissue from your femur. They'll be able to essentially print it for you. Okay. But through this all, I started thinking more about what does that mean to print? What is that? It's so mundane. We print every day, but what the hell is that? It's almost like we're broadcasting mental images through a medium. It's utterly magical. Yeah. This was my buddy Richard, who was running a very interesting experiment at Pratt, where it's no big deal now, but it was a pretty big deal 8 years ago. A lot of 3D printing patents had just become, just expired. So it gave birth to MakerBots and all this open sourcing of 3D printing. But he was very early to this, and what he did was he started modifying Arduino boards to make printers that would then print more printers. Like the printers would print parts of printers, and then you check out a printer like a library book and take it to your desk. It was pretty cool. So that was our team. And we ended up building this strange machine. I brought in my students from Pratt's architecture school, and we taught them how to incubate cells. There we are. And you know, it's interesting to me. It turns out we can do this. You know? This kind of discipline we have, whatever it is, this kind of peculiar form of attention we have to matter, can go into a lot of different forms of practice, it turns out. There's Nina in the autoclave. This is a machine that's constantly blowing air out so that fungal spores can't invade the tissue samples. Right? This is the recipe that Nina wrote out for us. It may, if you could read any of these words, it sounds a little scientific and scary, but it's quite comprehensible, and she explained it to us. And not unlike baking a cake, it's step by step. It's a recipe. There's the first successful one we incubated. Yeah. And some of them died. Yeah. This is one that died from a fungal infection. And what we did finally was we couldn't figure out what to do with this. So what we ended up with was we would incubate a medium, which was this little postage stamp of immortalized mouse cartilage. The way it's incubated is the sample that you order straight out of a medical catalog. It's totally no big deal. And you got to soak the expensive material, which is a collagen foam. And then you have to kind of, like my students called it, babysit this, you know, for a couple of weeks. And then it slowly transforms into this cartilage flesh. And then the machine would be injecting GFP cells into this medium. Okay, green phosphorescent protein. And so you put it on the black light, and it does indeed glow in the dark. My students thought it was hilarious while I was traveling around in Europe to make a monogram for me. So they printed a letter D for me. Yeah. Anyway, but I spent some time on this because for me, I mean, I lied at the exhibition because there's no way to really explain this. Either the machine is the art, or the things you print with the machine is the art. But what you just saw in that fast forward thing, that's the art. Putting together this network of people and machines and technologies and knowledge in order to produce I don't know, for lack of a better word, just this event where we could think and develop a new language. And bear in mind, this was very contrary to how I had been thinking. So for me, I didn't quite know what to make of the things that I learned from this. But I think what I did learn from this project has been playing out since. Another project during this time, simultaneous with this, was a student of mine at Pratt came to me when he was graduating and said, I got to talk to you about something, you know, now that I'm leaving. And I thought, oh, all right, this is going to be another one of these talks about can I come intern for you, whatever, you know. This one was different. So he came to me and said, my dad has this company, And they have patents to generate electricity from tides. And I think there might be some help we might need from you. So sure, that sounds pretty interesting. So when I met with them, and this is the company, Tidal Electric, they have a very elegant idea, which is to build artificial lagoons and to put gates on the lagoons. And just by regulating the water level changes, that the kinetic energy of the tidal energy changes could be captured with turbines. It's a nearly limitless source of electricity, a kind of total no-brainer to build. All right, like I mean, we should have one everywhere we could build it. You see, they came to me and they explained, yeah, we were very close to building the first one in Wales, but we had this big community meeting and it was a disaster and it got killed. So what happened, you know, like this seems like such a beautiful way of doing things. So, well, they were really upset that we were going to change the landscape. You know, you look out onto the ocean and now there's this machine out there. Essentially a circle, okay, an artificial lagoon. So their question to us was, can you help us figure out how to make this more culturally acceptable? Yeah. And so, yes, we can. Yeah. So it's kind of like this. You basically have to make an enclosure. It could be really any shape. The one they proposed was a circle because there's a direct relationship between volume of water in the lagoon and the electrical throughput. So what's maximum volume to minimum circumference? Circle. Yeah. So that's total engineering thinking. And it kind of works this way where by gating it, they can control the water levels. So as the water levels are trying to equalize and water rushing in and out, there's a turbine there at the gates to capture it. It's a pretty straightforward thing to build. You basically stack geotextile tubes and pump concrete through it, and then you pile rocks on top. That's it. And we do this all the time. It's just an example of something that's built for some other purpose. Yeah. So what we thought we could do, and this is where the kind of thinking about 3D printing as, or printing in general as a more abstract operation came in quite handy, because immediately it occurred to me that, yeah, these ships, the geotextile tubes are on giant spools. They're on the backs of GPS-guided ships, not unlike a printhead. So in principle, you can really make any shape you want. There's no problem of how can we get it precise. It's all done through GPS, so it's automated, not unlike a printing head. So we gave them images like this. And this was then in this period where Michael and I were talking a lot about realism and parafiction. And so we presented them with this image and we asked them to take two ideas away. One, we want to make a form that is difficult to recognize as being either artificial or natural. That's something in between. Two, we want to give you images that are renderings of what the project will look like after it's already built and you look at it on Google Earth. So just kind of completely jump over this whole kind of problem of disbelief. It used to be said if it was printed in the New York Times, it's got to be true. I think our version of it today is if it's on Google Earth, it's got to be real. So it's a kind of straightforward operation to say, all right, what does the project look like on Google Earth? Because the biggest problem culturally is people can't imagine how this new technology could possibly be real. Yeah. Yeah, and there's a lot of other little complexities to it that we were thinking through. But in essence, we were incorporating a lot of ideas that have been floating around since the 90s about redundancy and emergence, but it ends up becoming very practical on some level, where instead of having one giant lagoon, the idea was to have one large lagoon with many small lagoons on the inside. And the engineers found that fascinating because it then immediately occurred to them by having an array of batteries, they could then regulate the electrical throughput depending on peak and low consumption. But on some level, this is utterly bizarre because you're taking a 10 square kilometer chunk of the water landscape and wiring it up as though it was a battery. And there's something about that I was absolutely fascinated by. So this was a hypothetical site up in Bristol Bay, Alaska that we're originally studying. This also fell apart. They're now on their 6th try and apparently very close to doing one in Mexico. But we started out with just kind of existing in the new, but we're very interested in this idea that you could only see that there's something wrong with it when you see it at the largest scale. As you start zooming into it and inhabit it closer and closer to human scale, it becomes progressively more invisible. Yeah, and here are just some other versions. So the version they're going for is very modest, but I think the way they're thinking has definitely changed quite a bit. So we'll see where this goes. Yeah, this has already been, I think, 6 years of conversations with this company. So it will be at least 6 more, perhaps more. So anyway, this is what leads me to the kind of main topic here for today, which is technological substrate of our fictional realities. So I want to talk about this. Now, as hilarious and as awful as Donald Trump appearing on a wrestling show is, I think it's not many of us actually pause to think about the fact that this is on television, on cable television, and it's being broadcast. The scale at which it's disseminating. There's an infrastructure to this. So, I saw this a few days ago. Apparently, there's a propaganda Twitter account in China that mimics Donald Trump's tweets as a kind of, counter-information campaign. And when I read both of them, it's really hard to tell which one is authentic, whatever the hell that means. But the thing that I'm most fascinated by, when you go to, and you could do this right now on your phones, again, we're just so distracted by the idiocy of the actual language, we're not paying attention to what I think is the most important part of this, which are the numbers. So 58.4 million followers. Okay. Now, forget about the fact that that's a large number. The fact that it's such a precise number, because you can pull this out and get an exact count, that's new. Okay. Think about Nielsen ratings. I don't know if many of us are old enough here in this room to know what Nielsen ratings are. But it's like polling in general. Like, how many people just saw this TV show? We don't really know. So we have to use a statistical method of random sampling. Those annoying calls you get. Did you watch the debate last night or whatever? And then mathematically we can make a kind of estimate of exactly how many people saw it. And there's a politics to that. A politics become attached to these practices of statistical estimation. Because after all, that's a technology too. Now we have this other technology where we get an exact count. an exact head count. There is no estimation. We know exactly where those people are, in fact. We, in fact, can map it against who they are, what they bought on Amazon, what other Twitter feeds are they reading, how long did they stay here, how many tweets did they look at. It's exact. What new politics come out of this? The only reason this possibility even exists is due to a 100-year-long build-out of what's called the telematic infrastructure. I'm going to spend a little time talking about that coming up. But you've seen things like this. We're investigating Russian hacking, etc. You also saw things like this happening in Charlottesville. But did you know what made this event possible was a telematic device that allowed all these people to organize themselves. There's an amazing report, you can look this up. A New York Times reporter had embedded himself in the lead up to the organization of the Charlottesville event. They were organizing themselves on Discord. Do any of you know what Discord is? Discord is a free chat service for mostly teenagers and young adults that play video games. It's a video game chat service. And the reporter released records of the conversations that took place. And then at the end of this, I mean, it's just quite striking that it would happen through that they would organize through that. Right? But he makes this astonishing observation at the end of it. Well, if these kinds of free chat services, which are actually very advanced technology, was not available, most likely this would not have happened because they wouldn't have been able to organize. So this is the technological substrata I'm talking about. In relationship to this, after those two projects I showed, Michael and I, we were at this conference at Yale, and we wanted to investigate the relationship between aesthetics and possible political practices. And for that, I started looking into subcultures. It's something I've always been kind of fascinated by. And I had a couple of assistants at SCI-Arc researching this for me. And I basically instructed them, just go and document as many different subcultures as you could find. You know? So this is kind of a wonderful one, you know, like it's a kind of mix of goth and sportiness, you know, like it's called health goth, and it's already over here, but that was kind of a thing here in Brooklyn and Crown Heights like 5 years ago, right? And it's quite funny, you know. Like I was reading up on it, and somebody was interviewing one of the founders of the health goth movement, and accuses them. Isn't that a contradiction to be into death but also working out? It's like, oh no, there's no contradiction at all. You just work out to the point of death. Yeah. But what interested me through this was, and I specifically asked for, please document the name, some of their language, their keywords, their equipment, a representation of a person that participates, and how they occupy certain scene. Okay, so those are the different columns. When you go through this, after a while, it's quite just captivating and just absurd, you know, utterly absurd, and almost sublime because of how endless it is. There are so many of these. It's not like you had the counterculture hippies or the punks and that's it. You had the normal people and a group of punks. No, it's like a constellation of subcultures. To the point where I started wondering to myself, what's normal? What is the culture? You know, if there's nothing but counterculture, at some point it's counter to nothing, right? So I started thinking a better term for this, instead of subculture, is a small constituency. And the conclusion that I've been moving more and more to is there used to be a culture, and then like a big monolithic culture. What is it? Well, go to the Museum of Modern Art, go to Harvard, you know, and go to Cooper Union. That's culture, right? And whatever is subcultural is the stuff that's counter to that. You know, that's kind of protesting it. But what do we call those counter cultures when that big monolithic culture just collapses and is gone? Right? Yeah, which I think is largely the world we're living in today. And I think we need to consider the politics of it, but more importantly, I think we need to be conscious of the technological substrata of what led to this. So this is where, and this is some new material for you, Michael. I discovered this study as I'm kind of finding my way through this labyrinth. A 1976 study commissioned by the French government. The French president of that time, Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, commissioned Simone Nora and Alan Mink to study the political implications of France's participation in the American hegemony of communications infrastructures. So the Americans built out the infrastructure by which we communicate. What does it mean that we're basically playing on America's turf? What are the dangers? What are the limitations on our future, on our French future? So, I'm going to read a little bit. This was the piece I wrote for Architects newspaper. Yeah, I think you read that, and it's been kind of ballooning since then. So bear with me while I read you a little bit of this. In 1976, Simone Nora and Alan Mink were asked by France's president to issue a report on the dangers and possibilities of a computerized society. Astonishingly, given what's happening in the world today, they predicted a coming society where anyone with access to the telematic infrastructure could manufacture and disseminate information, leading to a loss of trust in the veracity of information and to an erosion of the cultural coherence in the society. They warned that such a society might be ungovernable. This was nearly 2 decades before the first internet browser became available. So it's prophetic. It is sobering then to consider their recommendation for addressing this looming danger. They proposed a socialization of information. What this means today, what this might mean in the 21st century, remains unclear. Pause for a second. This word telematics, that was a neologism coined within this report. Mink and Nora traced that there were 2 very important technological regimes that were converging. One was communications technologies, and the other was computation technologies. Computers and the telephone, etc. Computers, telephone, TV, it was merging into one thing. And to give a name to this merger of these 2 technologies, they proposed 2 words. One, thankfully, didn't hold. They proposed a term they called communications. Horrible word. Hilarious word. The other was telematics. Yeah. And I think that remains, a relevant word and a word I want to keep using. And a lot of good architectural criticism, I must say, is being written today. But it gets completely lost in the sea of information that is available. You all know this. I'm talking about like Instagram. You know? The dialectic of fact versus fiction has melted into a flat ontology of mere data. The cynic today would ask in boredom, does it even matter that the news is fake? But this is true for all criticism today. There are only two options I see in the face of the contemporary situation. We would either have to completely rebuild the authority of old institutions, which I think is utterly impossible. Or we would have to understand that communication and its politics will have to be hypothesized in a completely new way outside of the framework of criticism. Because after all, how can you have criticism when we have no authority? And I gotta admit, I'm sad about this, wistful and melancholy about this. I like good criticism. When anyone can disseminate information, when anyone can like or troll an idea, when anyone can invent news, when the theater of criticism appears more important than the criticism itself, I'm talking about like Fox versus CNN. What role can any critic play outside of the limited audience, the very small constituencies that consumes critique primarily for reinforcing existing opinion? And that's important because traditionally, we have criticism to change minds. That's not how criticism is used today. We use criticism to build up what we already believe. It may be tempting to conceptualize some post-criticism society, but as Nora and Mink warn, such a society might be ungovernable. It's Donald Trump. Nonetheless, I continue to think about Nora Mink's proposal of socializing information. I consider it to be an important but enigmatic problem. If miraculously something can be figured out and implemented one day, I think criticism would certainly have some newfound authority. But it is premature to dream about the possible positive effects of such a rebirth and the roles the critic or the architectural critic might play until we just think a little bit about how to construct such a thing today. What does it mean to socialize information? I have no idea. Strangely, and I think you'll all agree with me, I think every small constituency thinks their opinion is not being properly represented today. Everyone. I have my own complaints, but I'm pretty sure everybody has a complaint and feels underrepresented. This is true despite the irony that no matter how marginal or bizarre or preposterous, any opinion and orientation in society can be searched for online and criticism can be found to support it. Yeah. With that said, speaking for, well, I'm going to skip this last part. I think you get my drift here. Now, I just wanted to show you something that is quickly being forgotten. 2 years after this report was given to the French president, French Telecom instituted, in 2 years, this thing called the Minitel. This was the internet before the internet. The way they rolled it out, and this is what a socialist government can do. They said, because French Telecom was part of the government, this year you can either have a telephone book or a computer terminal. And everybody said, I want the computer terminal. So you could pay your utility bills, check your grades at the state university, check the news. There was even talk about voting on this, which never happened. And it was pervasive and something that the French were extremely proud of. For a period of about 30 years, they were the most technologically advanced society in the world. And it endured until 2012. That's when the last Minitel was unplugged. And why did it fail? It just couldn't compete with this other thing called the internet. This crappy computer terminal where all you could do was access the government ministry. It was kind of like a ghettoized version of America Online, you know, if you even remember what that is. Yeah. But I guess they could never anticipate in 1978 the problem of globalization and global competition. So these are, I think, sobering things to consider relative to the technological reality we live in today. I tell my students, we're doing in the middle of a desk crit, and maybe you should think a little bit about the Farnsworth House. And of course, you know what they say, right? What's the Farnsworth House? So if that happened to me in 1994, my professor would tell me, all right, go into the dungeons of Avery Library, and you're going to come back with some Xeroxes of it, and then you're going to tape it down to your drafting table, and you're going to trace this and ink it, and you're going to torture the fuck out of you, and you're going to know that goddamn building, right? Yeah. So, you know, get change, you know, I got to find the book, you know, like get change for $10, and Xerox, you know, and et cetera. It was like a week-long thing. You know what we do now, right? Google it. Right then and there. Right? And you know what happens when you Google it? You get millions of pictures of Farnsworth houses. And some weird ones that are not the Farnsworth house. You know? And we just kind of swim in this kind of milieu, of this ocean of technologized images. And there's a politics to this, you see. And I think we need to trace this a little bit, you know, see how this telematic infrastructure was built out over 100 years, and think a little bit about, now we see what this battle is with 5G and Huawei. Is anybody from China here? Okay. You know what Huawei is. You know what 5G is. And you may have heard, I hope, the US government is playing hardball with those countries that initially accepted the offer of China to come out and build this communications infrastructure for free. Why? It's because it's the exact same concern France had in 1976. Whoever controls the communications infrastructure essentially has a leg up on power globally. The British had the oceans, the United States had the highways, and then the internet. What's to come? You know, there are other battles that are being waged today. Related to all this is the recent work we're doing, which is with artificial intelligence. This is the final bit I'll talk about tonight. So, the red herring here, the distraction was, this was a show about aerial photography. In actuality, this was an investigation of technologized images of the world. Google Earth, for instance. And how progressively the photographing of external reality is becoming automated. Okay. This isn't just robotic picture-taking machines, but it's also in the interpretations of the photographs that are taken. That is the use of what we call artificial intelligence to identify what's in the pictures. We know a little bit about GIS and pictures like this, but do you think about pictures like this, like from video games? It's actually the very same technology, just branded differently. It's a very old desire. I love this picture from the Alpine Museum in Switzerland, this obsession we have of miniaturizing the world, of modeling it, right? And the power we get from that. Right? It's not unrelated to scenes like this, or scenes like this. All right. Yeah, so what we ended up doing was we wrote some scripts to scrape GIS databases to get access to very high resolution photographs of the planet's surface. And then we started doing everything we could think of to manipulate it. Everything from just simple photoshopping to matte painting and eventually to using convolutional neural networks. So we made a series of kind of like Alpine Museum-like terrain models. Here are some of them. We collaborated with our new friends at Solid Terrain Modeling that make stuff like this for like natural history museums, really gigantic relief models. They have a very clever little contraption which is 3D inkjet printing. Oops, sorry. Yeah, so they actually custom built this head where the same data from milling is then used for having the 4 colors of the inkjet head travel up and down. And it's kind of a 3D photographic printing. You know? And when you see it in 3D, it's like, oh, it's a model. No, it's actually a photograph. Manipulated in 3D. We also made a bunch of images, like, okay, you've jumped into that model, this is what you see. So there are a lot of kind of side interests in parafictional photography and like people like Gursky and Demand, and that was all kind of in the back of the mind. Yeah, that was all fun, but the really interesting stuff that became the next thing was artificial intelligence. So what you see here, we used this script called style transfer, the style transfer script. Some people here know this. I brought a picture of one of your projects. What you see here is a result of what the script does. It uses a neural network to identify form in one image and what they call style in a second image. And then it blends the two. So this is the result of one of them. What you're seeing is an aerial photograph of downtown LA, which was inputted as the form image, with a photograph of an aerial photograph of the Himalaya mountains, which was inputted as the style image. So this is a blend of downtown LA with the Himalayas. So there's Dodger Stadium on the right, the freeways. It's uncanny, the seamlessness. So the kind of interest we had in this kind of funny problem of the seamless collage in the parafictional works we were interested in. For me, this was like the apotheosis of that conceptual problem. Pixel by pixel, it reassembles a photograph. Is that really a collage, I wonder? I'm going to show you more of this. Yeah, these are all blends from high-res aerial photographs from different parts of the world. So the fictional realities that are being produced with this AI tool was really the heart of the inquiry here. Yeah, and this is the image I gave you for the lecture website. This is Uptown Manhattan. There's Yankee Stadium now, with an aerial photograph from the savannah in Africa. Yeah, and this was just some shots from the gallery, how we put it up. There's Jeff. Trying to explain to him what I'm doing. Oh yeah, this is pretty cool. You've seen some stuff about AI, haven't you? Like Google Deep Dream, etc. Yeah. Aren't you curious how this stuff works? Aren't you a little curious about what this means for how we work as designers in the future? What's happening here? What is this leading to? I started thinking about older problems of influence. So here we have the Pantheon, Villa Rotunda, the Chiswick House, and Monticello. You're not going to tell me all four of these masterpieces are absolutely original. Yeah, influence is pervasive. It just shit gets in our head. We're constantly working on stuff we've seen. And as Harold Bloom says, where do masterpieces come from? From old masterpieces. It's from creative misinterpretation of great work. I really agree with that. You don't think it's happening anymore? Look at that. Yeah. But beneath it all, beyond just the problem of how to train good human designers, I think we also have this problem underneath it, in the strata, in the substrata. So you've done stuff like this, right? So you type in Le Corbusier's 5 points, right? And before the internet, like an asshole professor will name the 5 points, and right? But this is how we do this now. And you know what we get, right? We get this mess. This debris field. Okay. The most interesting thing about this, it's cropped here, but there'll always be this little statistical tabulation at the top. Something like 12 million results in 3.5 seconds at the end of every Google search. That's what I'm asking you to pay attention to. Just consider what that means. Why is it so precise? What does that precision tell us about the reality of our technology today? Okay. It's not a library anymore. Yeah. You may not have seen this. This is the most wonderful thing I've seen recently. So, Amazon AI designed to create phone cases terribly malfunctions. Okay. So it's not clear if this was an art project or somebody was really trying to make money. It took some research to figure out what actually happened here. Okay, but it resulted in stuff like this on Amazon. Okay, so somebody got access to some public domain database related to healthcare, which had kind of slanted on senior healthcare, and wrote, I guess, a bot, an AI script, to mine that database and to pull images and words, to recombine them into new things that would then be printed onto iPhone cases. And this was all automated and then sent to Amazon, okay? Indexed on Amazon, and then as soon as somebody buys it, it would return and then bounce to a factory in Shenzhen that would then make it and mail it to you. But I guess what was a little bit unanticipated was the absolutely absurd, bizarre results. Talk about misprision, you know. This isn't an art project. This was on Amazon. It was discovered on Amazon. And there were 31,000 of these. Some funnier than others. Yeah. It's the very same kind of tool that I've been using in our office and our studios at Sire recently, both me and my partner, Carol. And last year when we were running it, Dan Horowitz right there was my assistant, and to his right, Sengtai Lintner was a student. They're both teaching at RPI now. They're out in the world. Sengtai did this. Okay. Sengtai very smartly selected an orthographic-ish elevation photo by the Beschers of these kind of industrial scenes that they were famous for taking. And then something very different below it, taken as the style image, and then you get that on the right. Okay. Yeah. So think back on, Pantheon to Monticello, Amazon, weird Amazon cases, this kind of automation of signifiers I find very, very interesting. Scary. This is, I think, dark stuff. But I'm also convinced this is the next territory that needs to be theorized a little bit. My students currently, and you might be curious to see what they're up to this year. This was some kind of, I think it was Milk Cathedral blended with Angkor Wat. Yeah. I can't remember what this one was. We're trying to focus a little more on the orthographic this year because of what we learned last year. This one's pretty cool. Do any of you recognize the form image? It's a close-up of Lloyd's in London, mapped against the style of something else. I forget what that one was. But I'm astonished and fascinated by the precision. It's not like a Van Gogh filter in Photoshop. This is some other shit now. This is something I've never seen before. This year we're also experimenting with a different AI. We're now playing with GANs, generative adversarial networks. And it does something else. So we'll start with a picture like this, which is a kind of untouched area of Argentina. And then we'll train it, this student is training it with a set of 100 images of planned photographs from favelas. And it produces things like this. I can't do it here, but the really shocking thing is zooming in on this. You see cars in the streets. There are people next to the cars in the streets. Yeah. This is a little bit more abject, but again, I'm fascinated by the precision of this. I wouldn't really say this is even architecture yet. These are just pictures. They're almost nonsensical pictures. But it's interesting to consider, isn't it? Like, how do we see things, meaning in relationship to form, versus how does the statistical, automated, mechanized misprisions produce unexpected, dark, sometimes nonsensical regimes of signifiers that we don't quite know how to read. I'm pretty certain, and this is again a little bit dark, but I think this is going to be more how culture is produced in the future. Yeah. As much as we would like to deny it, disturbed by it, it's already happening. I didn't bring a clip of this, but on YouTube, this is quite shocking. My daughter, like many 8-year-old girls, are obsessed with these unboxing videos. You get a present. Let's see what's in the box. And it's just a video of unboxing the present. And it's kind of cute enough, but there are tens of thousands of these videos with millions of views. And then I find out a significant number of them now are being generated artificially, that there is no person. It's a manipulation of previous videos by AI. And some of them make absolutely no sense whatsoever. You don't even know what you're watching, but there's my daughter just fascinated by it, entertained, delighted. My brother-in-law has a tech startup in Los Angeles right now called Rival Theory. He has 3 clients right now. Ray Dalio, who's one of the largest hedge fund investors, who wants a kind of AI trading tool. Tony Robbins, the kind of self-help guru, who turns out to have made massive amounts of money in his career and is one of the most important angel investors in California. Amazing. And he wants a Tony Robbins that you could talk to in everybody's phone. And the third client is the Emir of Abu Dhabi. And all of these 3 clients want to completely virtualize their expertise. Yeah, I'm not going to talk about this, but yeah. So this is where I'm going to end here. With just, I want to make 5 observations from my initial kind of study of AI. And it's related to this substrata that I'm interested in talking to you about today. So, the dream of artificial intelligence is quite old. You can find 17th century little automaton machines and things like that. Some recent approaches to the problem are very novel and producing some very surprising results. It has inspired a massive reallocation of research funding. You have no idea the movement of capital into this right now. And corporate investment. It's something you all need to keep an eye on. Recently, my partner Ruy Klein and I decided to study AI in a little more detail. At our office and with our students, we have been experimenting with style transfer algorithms based on convolutional neural networks. It's just the first step, but the results have surprised us. There's a lot on our mind as we do these first experiments, but here are some initial observations, just 5. AI, number 1, AI repositions the problem of form versus content. The dichotomy is already fully articulated in ancient Greece, as we all know, 2 millennia ago. It is the conceptual substrate of religions, for example, body versus soul, art histories, shape versus meaning, natural histories, extensive versus intensive phenomena, etc., etc. What this long history has always had as a maybe a lesser noticed decisive component is the interpretive function of the human observer for whatever action or event emerges out of this dichotomy. AI models transforms the problem of form versus content into a problem of numerical modeling. The enacting of events can then be automated, skipping the middleman, so to speak. That is, you, the human beholder. AI removes meaning and value from this very old dichotomy and flattens it. Number 2, it is nonetheless important to observe that AI models are abstractions. AI models are not concrete. They're not protein-based neurological apparatuses found inside the bodies of biological entities. That is your brains. They are not events in the evolution of biological history. They are numerically based conceptual apparatuses that can be freely deployed on any platform that can store and compute signaling events. They are not brains. They are abstractions of brains. Humans are producing these abstractions. The significance of this is an important open question. Number 3, in future versions of software, say like Rhino, AI will introduce metaphors of action that will become more important than the concept of undo even. Consider the strange genius of the undo function. As you do your work, all of your decisions are being recorded. You can then freely move back and forth within this linear event history of your labor. Primitive attempts to embed the knowledge of the expert into software has given us things like autocorrect. Right now, things like autocorrect are nothing more than annoying reminders to fix typos and questionable grammatical suggestions, or formatting, like put a comma there. Might we see new software metaphors such as show me other options, or make it better, or tell me what you think, or simply do it for me? And you think I'm kidding? You should see how much money Autodesk is investing into AI right now. You think it's hard to automate the picking shit from a Revit component library? Yeah. That's an easy problem. Number 4. By the way, did you hear about this? The first AI thing selling at an auction at Christie's for a lot of money? Raised a lot of questions about intellectual property. Who's the one that gets paid? Okay. Number 4. AI also problematizes the 300-year-old concept of the author. As a society, we don't know how to solve this problem yet, from a legalistic point of view. At a recent auction at Christie's, a portrait generated by AI sold for $432,000 and $500. It raised some very difficult questions about who the author is. The important questions pertain to ownership and copyright. Not anything to do with the natural rights of authorship. Despite critiques of the concept of the author, and we know this in postmodernist discourse, some of you have read Barthes, right? Death of the Author, etc. The author still exists and remains a powerful social and economic convention by virtue of copyright legislation and rights management. We're going to see an acceleration of these machine authors in coming years that will produce a surplus of new works from previous works. Think about that weird Amazon thing I showed you. What kind of intellectual property is this, and who profits? Who owns it? And this is my last point. AI is not about replacing human intelligence. It's a total misnomer. It has nothing to do with that. It is about replacing human labor. Earlier this year, in a New York Times opinion piece, Thomas Edsall, and all of you should try to follow Thomas Edsall's articles. It's the best thing in the New York Times. Edsall wrote a piece entitled, "Robots Can't Vote, but They Helped Elect Trump." He cites as evidence a study by MIT that mapped the density, kind of a population map, of where automation machines are located in the United States. It, in an uncanny way, correlates precisely to those states that flipped from blue to red in the last election. The explanation is quite simple. Automation is putting a hell of a lot of people out of work. Automation doesn't take place adjacent to human labor, it replaces it. This is the flip side of technological progress. Though we initially thought that AI might be an interesting collaborator in our work, it is more likely the thing that will replace many aspects of our labor. AI is not collaborative labor, it is slave labor. Dystopian science fiction, movies, books may have gotten that part right. This kind of robot rebellion, etc. But unlike science fiction, the important conversation, the real one, is not whether or not machines have rights. That's a total red herring. But the right conversation is, how do we redistribute the wealth that is accumulated through this automation? In this respect, discussions about the possibility, which seem so distant right now, about universal income, for instance, I think is the right discussion to have. Whether or not we'll be properly enlightened to navigate this remains to be seen. Yeah. And that's it. Do we want to do any questions, or should we call it a night?
I think we do.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Anybody have a question, or should I start?
I'll just leave that up.
Yeah.
I was actually thinking about these images, and when you stop.
When it's perfect.
What is the criteria that you're using to judge?
Yeah, meaning which one do I pick to show
Exactly.
you? The one I like.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is why I say it's slave labor. The slave doesn't get to decide. I decide. So the part is, and maybe an analogy is many years ago, I might have had underpaid interns in my office, and I give them an absurd instruction like, why don't you take Foster's Lloyd's building and put some Baroque shit on it? I'll come back later and see if you've done something I like. I come back and go, no, I don't like it. Do it again. And then eventually, ooh, I like that one. Okay. And then, that's mine. Okay. Okay. So I don't, and it took me a while to admit this, because when I started doing this, I kind of went into it with a kind of romantic idea of collaborating with the machine, and yeah, it'd be cool to become a cyborg, And then after a while, I had to admit, no, it's not like that. There's a problem of work, labor. Who does it? What's my relationship to it? Who owns it? Who decides? Who chooses? That I don't think is going away, my friend. But, I could come right on and say it. The architectural profession is, saturated with a lot of dumb labor, right? And you do certain forms of this work, and it's like, the fuck am I doing? This is horrible. I hate my life. That kind of joke about picking bathroom tiles, right? But now it's not that anymore. It's really picking from component libraries in Revit that are there because Autodesk cut a deal with the manufacturers. And it's now rationalized with a regime of construction managers, right, and client representatives that progressively brings efficiency, economic efficiency, right? Now, I see absolutely no reason why that can't be automated by artificial intelligence. And from my conversations with engineers at Autodesk, off the record, They can already do this. The problem is they don't want to be responsible yet. They don't know how to insure this.
Risk.
You have risk. If you're the one picking and you're working at the architect's office, the insurance policy that covers the architecture office will take care of that. But if it's the software doing it, it's the software company that needs to be insured. Right?
That's some policy for
This is the real battle beneath the surface here. While the rest of us kind of haggle over, is that okay for machines to be designing shit? They're not designing anything. They're just doing the things that are in principle already automated. But the association with persons that have rights, that is where the real trickiness is right now. Yeah. Have you heard of WoeBot? WOE bot? You can download it on your iPhones later tonight. It's the first impressive, significant AI therapy bot that's been developed. There are a lot of issues here. There's a lot of disclaimers you got to check off. You know that I'm not really taking their advice, this therapist's advice, because the company doesn't want to get sued in case somebody like does therapy with this WoeBot and then ends up committing suicide, right? Right. I mean, think about it. But I tried it out, and it's like it's pretty impressive. I mean, it's not like Eliza from the 70s, you know, some decision tree. It's weird. It's quite weird. Uncanny. You know, so it demystifies it a little bit if you just investigate a little bit. What is the stuff that we're calling AI? You know, for the most part, these are statistical transformations based on tensors, 3D blocks of data, 3-coordinate blocks of data on spatial locations, and progressive transformations of it. I mean, it's not that smart, you know. It's, yeah. But it's producing results because of the scale at which it's being manipulated, the massive amount of numbers that are at work.
So maybe, like, what a designer can offer that a robot can't offer is the ability to take responsibility.
Yeah, very much so. Until we reconceptualize the nature of rights. Right now, it's biopolitical. We have a kind of one-to-one correspondence between biological entities and rights of the individual. But to me, that seems like a very simple policy adjustment. And it's a kind of policy modeling that doesn't even exist in China, by the way. And engineers are saying the battle's already over. China is going to win this technological war. Why? Because in order to advance AI models, you need data. You need to record behavior. And there is no privacy rights in China. There's just a kind of massive accumulation of data in China taking place right now. So a lot of Silicon Valley engineers are moving to China right now because that's where the action is. It really makes you wonder, you know, what politics emerge out of this. A lot of things that we consider to be written in stone, unchanging, inalienable rights, you know. I mean, just look at our language, you know, in the Constitution. Like, temporary. I don't think there's any reason for why it would last. And it depends, you know, it really depends, you know. So I think we have a tendency in the West to separate the technical from the political. when clearly they're bound up in each other. And if anything, the political emerges out of the technological if you actually look at the history. So I hope we can have some frank conversations and debates about this in this country. We may want to hang on to some of these ideas. Right? Yeah. I would like to. Also, judgment. We're empowered in a way the machines are not, which is related to your point, I think. Just the fact that I get to choose which one I like. There's no reason why then that can't also be automated, where the choice is automated. Right? That can happen too. But for now, we have policies and economies of biopolitical entities that is humans, that have rights that are mapped onto it. Right? Human authors, humans have intellectual property. That's why it's very disturbing to see that an AI model now, here's a weird little instant, and I hope it's just a novelty, where a machine had a copyright. Because that's what you're selling when you sell that paintings. Right? So we might want to, pump the brake a little bit right now. I remember the first time I saw the pencil icon in software. Thought that's pretty weird. Because I knew a thing or two about computation, and a little thing or two about graphing, right? Graphing lines through functions, and that's the reality of that line. But then, what the hell is this pencil icon doing here? It's not a pencil, right? But we're going to have other versions of this. Maybe there's a person icon, there's an icon that represents some assistant, and I guess we already have that with the paperclip with the eyes and Jeeves and whatever. It's just that they don't work very well yet, But that's what was so captivating to me about these results with the new technology. It's pretty good. When we did a review, we just had our mid-review, and the student worked really hard to manipulate this. And then some pretty smart people in the jury said, you made it worse. You had that. Why'd you do more work? Just do that. Make it exactly like that. Because what you did in your interpretation of it actually made it worse. And it was profoundly disturbing to the student. But that would mean I didn't work on it at all.
Labor and processes.
Right? I mean, that's pretty, superstitious, don't you think? That the thing that makes that drawing yours is how hard you worked on it? It's kind of absurd, actually.
So I have a thought/question, and it goes to you said you weren't sure they were collages. The convolutional neural network weaving of pixel by pixel data into new seamless images. Because I think one of the things that comes up, and this is either an issue we're going to find a new way to think through, or it's an issue that we need to jettison. Because part of what the argument leads to is our power as architects, as cultural designers, is within aesthetics. That's we who are able to choose this one, not that one, are able to construct arguments about this one over that one, is because of an aesthetic engagement with what is being produced. Whether it's our labor or not is almost an ethical argument. And so whenever we look back over the last 150 years to these moments where what Rancière would call the redistribution of the sensible through an aesthetic crack, or an aesthetic recombination, or an aesthetic break, Courbet bashing into a genre that it doesn't belong, content and painting styles from a lower, lesser regarded genre, or collage and montage in the early 20th century, rupturing scenes within the burgeoning mechanical reproductions of lithographs and photography, or pop art in the 1960s. All of them at one level or another engage collage. They're not all the same collage. They're different forms of collage. But they have, in their sort of genetic desire to crack a certain dominant aesthetic code to produce another possible aesthetic, this sort of issue of appropriating from this to another context, or combining in a way that produces a relationship we haven't seen before. And so if the convolutional neural networks are not a kind of collage, because they seem to me like they could be argued to be so, but if they're not, then what is shifting in your thinking if there's something now outside of that? You know what I'm asking.
Oh yeah, totally. I have a picture here. Like this. Yeah, this one. You know this photograph by Gursky. I've been thinking. That's where it started for me. Like, I was asking myself, is this a collage? Right? And if you don't know this work and how it's made, you wouldn't know why I'm even asking the question, right? This is actually 3 different photographs that were essentially photoshopped together. It's a kind of impossible elevation view, because the photoshopping then eliminated some of the parallax and the distortion. So there's something a little bit uncanny about it. Like, if you look at it long enough, you begin to realize there's something not right about it. And he worked extremely hard to eliminate any trace of manipulation. Right? So for me, it raises a question like, if it's not, is what makes something a collage the mode in which it's being received and interpreted? In other words, if you read it as collage, it's a collage. If you don't read it as a collage, it's not. It doesn't matter how it's actually made. That whether or not it's sampled or cropped and pasted or blended, or like the techniques of collage maybe are unimportant relative to the mode of reception. Right? The effect is, I mean, your argument about what it does to habits of seeing that might be dominant at the time, that's maybe an interesting one where maybe it would argue this is a collage, because it then negates certain habits of seeing a photograph. And only a collage could do that.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Not to interrupt, because I want to hear your thoughts on the convolutional neural networks. But so I use this. I also use Philippe Scher quite often too.
Yeah, he's pretty good.
And they are. We receive them as photographs. I think that's how we engage them as images. Because they remove the traces of the seam and/or material tectonic of assembly that we attribute to collage as a kind of rupture, suture, fracture that allows us to have immediate knowledge of the juxtapositions of things that don't go together, coming together to form a new whole. But I think what's going on with both Gursky and Philippe Scher and other ones, this is also within actually they're all the whole Dusseldorf school from the Beckers, is they're not showing the collage at the level of the technique or the material or even evidentiary process, but we know something's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And that distancing from how we normally understand photographs to work presents a problem, and that doubt is almost like a conceptual rupture that goes on within these images. which is why I'm fascinated by them.
Mhm.
And I don't know if collage is the right word for that. They are technically digital collages,
Mhm.
but we don't see them as that.
Mhm.
But we do not see them either as completely natural, right? So this is the other thing that the collage was attempting to rupture, was the naturalism of the ways in which the world looked.
Mm.
So it's to
Yep.
me like a super fascinating terrain that we're working.
Mhm.
That's interesting, because I mean, the earlier argument was around the photograph being sort of perceived as natural,
Right.
and all the old phenomenological arguments that actually we don't see that way.
Mm. Mm.
So you're sort of at a third remove to that.
Mm. Mm. I think we got an even crazier scenario now where we're beginning to observe that our very imagination, like that phenomenological subject, is actually, there's nothing natural left there because we're so saturated by pictures we've seen that it's actually substituted our imagination. So that's why I start with the Earth, like,
Right.
I mean, what's more natural than the Earth? But then when you think of the Earth, all you can think of is a photograph of an Earth you've seen. It's completely substituted whatever natural way of seeing you might have had.
Also,
Yeah.
that rupture, there's always that friction between knowing and seeing,
Mm. Mm.
and whether we are sort of coming out of an optical legacy, which may be going away.
Yeah.
There's more knowing coming into all this material.
Mm.
And it has something to do with what you spoke about in terms of the Google image search that we now do every day at our desk when we're talking with students, and we do in our office when we're doing the thing formerly known as research, and we are inundated with this. But there's these moments that happen, like the Google image search for Maleevich's white on white, which gives you anything except for white. And actually
That's a hilarious example.
makes me
actually.
like it more.
Yeah.
Which is, I know that's weird, but I actually like it more that it's every pastel tone of pinks and blues and mauves and siennas, and I'm like, wow, this is a great work of art.
Mm.
It has nothing to do with white.
It's a phenomenon of being disappointed by originals.
Mm. Mm.
Right, like you finally see La Gioconda in the flesh, and it's this limited board, and it's actually much more, engaging in reproduction.
Oh, yeah.
And it fills the universe. It's
My version of that was
limited,
going to
so I
a
think,
football game for the first time
yeah.
after seeing it on TV for years.
This is
Sucks. It's boring. I want to go home and watch it on TV.
it's
In the 90s, I remember the struggle towards photorealism. Remember when we were first doing renderings in our office, and God, it looks like shit. It looks like something done on a computer, and after the novelty of stuff done on the computer wears off, it's like, how do we make it look good? And and the struggle to find the right textures, because use the off-the-shelf metal roof texture and it looks like crap. And then you gotta do weird shit to photographs of wood,
Right, we use shingles.
and then all right, now it looks right.
There's noise.
Yeah, and I remember you telling me about when you were actually doing that manually for the house, the collages, your famous collages of the house. You would scuff up the black and white photograph, you would scissor out from the magazine, and then you'd be scuffing it up until it looked right, until it looked like metal or something, and and then now it's just so easy. I mean, it's automatically it looks good and automatically looks real. The thing that's most stunning to me these days is the Unreal game engine and these real-time rendering software, because you just buy stuff and drop it into the scene. So student was dropping plants that are moving and flames and rocks and everything looks perfect. I was like, that's just crazy, you know. And then, so you want to do it in the opposite direction a little bit to make it look less good, or maybe a little more uncanny, and so it's. I think I just operate out of some superstitious belief that like the real special ingredient here I bring to the table is criticality, and you know, but that's fading very quickly, you know, like
Well, this can go on for probably the rest of the night. But are there any burning questions, thoughts, things you guys want to ask of David?
of course.
No, I just had a kind of a recent observation about some of these images that you're working with. It seems like these CNN images, they're kind of old-fashioned in a way because they have this kind of fake seamlessness, almost like a classical architecture in a way, because there's this hierarchy, there's parts, everything kind of gets seen together in a very old-fashioned way. And I was wondering what you thought about that, because somehow we're drawn to those kind of, when we curate the images and put them together, we kind of naturally are drawn to these more old-fashioned notions of complexity and seamlessness in architecture. And they're very different than kind of the current architectural languages that you see today, which lack all hierarchy and have like a very different kind of politics.
I don't know, like.
I mean, I don't know about that one, but definitely like the Lloyd's bank.
I think you can make a lot of different stuff, you know. Like I tend to choose things like that because that's what looks good to me, you know. But it can produce a lot of weird, abject shit that looks horrible too, you know. So I don't think there's anything necessarily in the AI model that promotes certain, you know, forms of composition unless I'm privileging it, you know.
Right, but we tend to choose those ones.
Yeah, I mean, but why wouldn't I? Why would I pick ones that look like shit?
Are they totally surprising, or you have a feeling for it now?
Yeah, I mean, you know, every time
hierarchy that you know is already.
Every time I think I got it now, and I know what's going to happen, I'm surprised. That's why I know it's a little bit different from the more linear image filters that you find in like Photoshop. You know, after a while, you know exactly what you're going to get. It's not true. You know, I have no idea still, like why it's reading certain things and not others, and it takes a hell of a lot of trial and error, you know, to get good results. And also, the models can be continually tinkered with too, you know. So, I mean, you remember last year? It's just you got to try for every one that's decent, there's probably like 30 that was just shit, you know, and you know, but it's all the same, you know, relative to the model. I mean, none of them are errors, you know. It's just an expression of the way it's been delineated, right? As software, you know. The difference is the ones that somehow jump out at us as being more meaningful or potentially meaningful. That's why then I think there is a kind of apophenia at work, you know. It's like we'll see the Virgin Mary in that potato chip but not that potato chip, and why, and you know, and it has everything to do with us and our culture and our ways of seeing and histories of seeing. So it is mapping against our own visual histories, right? So that's why it can't ever substitute the judgment. It can substitute the labor, but it can't substitute the judgment.
Do you think it's in a state of maturation? Like, do you think it's learning?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I jumped on it. I knew about the research since like 2002, when it was really primitive and it looked horrible. Kind of like computer-generated music, you know, like you could search for this, like computer-generated, like Mozart, and like 20 years ago, like, ooh, you know, that's computer-generated. crap, and thank God, like it's never going to be as good as a human. Now, I challenge you to tell the difference. It's scary good, and it's being generated in a completely different way. It's yeah. So I think it's just kind of an old myth that there's some special thing about us that can't ever be mechanized. But I think we have to admit that's just not true. That's superstition.
Maybe on that follow, do you see the specific software with an engagement with what you guys are trying? Is it evolving in its knowledge yet, or there's no judgment mechanism for it to kind of push it further or push it differently?
Well, at SciArc, like I have my buddy Casey Ream, who's way more hardcore about this, and he sees me as a kind of nostalgic person by saying, like, I'm the one who picks. And he says, we don't need somebody to pick. We can develop a machine for that too. Like, get rid of everybody. But then, like, when I see, like, what happens, it's, got a long way to go. I think the judging part is still very... Sorry, go ahead.
I have a question on that, because, when it comes to artificial intelligence and choice, because if I go on, if I Google something, I already have a data record of what will appear. For instance, I get automated playlists, I get all sorts of choices made for me, so you could say that artificial intelligence is pulling me already. Doesn't that come into account in the broader perspective of artificial intelligence as who is making the choice?
I think AI is being used very differently by companies like Google and Amazon. Something that's very similar to that is I've read that Amazon has a kind of spectacularly advanced logistical system where they can have products already moving towards you before you buy it. I mean, based on a kind of record, a kind of prediction of what kind of stuff you would buy.
You suddenly don't really have choice because you want to sort of see the diversity that's truly out there. You're funneled down the path that you're already walking on.
The way I've heard it explained to me by engineers was when the application is very finite, where there's clear criteria of success, like the correct search results came up, or better than before, or that person did end up buying that thing, that we already started moving in their direction, right? And you can confirm this, because there are records of all of it for every transaction. Like those kind of problems, they tell me, are actually very easy. When it's an actual application, it's very easy. But with something like this, where like the kind of weird thing we might do on a jury, this is a better one than this one. It's a little more complex.
But it's a simple act of liking is to say that I constantly get exposed to the same music all over, again and again. Then perhaps I won't step into a genre or.
I think the problem is what we're doing politically.
Yeah.
Our politics, when we're picking one, like together as a group, we say this one and not that one. I think at its basis is irrational, and it's seen as a significantly more difficult AI problem. Yeah, because it's irrational, not because it's smarter, but because it's the opposite. You see,
Rule-based.
yeah. There's something weird about our politics. I think that's difficult to comprehend and rationalize. Yeah, go ahead. Just say.
Back to the student who, I think it was this image that he said was in the review, and they said, well, why didn't you just end it there? Why did you have to tamper with it or edit it? And it kind of comes back to the question of authorship. Because I was thinking, like, the same way the sculptor is more valued than his tools, doesn't this kind of flip everything around? And the final creator kind of becomes superfluous in this whole situation. So the person who created the tool is much more valuable. And in what they create in the same way they're working in, what is it, Adobe or Autodesk, and how the person coding it or working on that AI could, in a way, be much more valuable than the true creator, whatever comes out, because all it takes is that one button to create an image or so on. So there's a whole world of work that's gone into it before that final person.
I couldn't tell if you're taking a position.
I'm just asking, like, does the final person who just presents the image, like, is superfluous and are not important in this whole situation? So who's more valued in this state? In this situation? If that makes sense. I don't know how to...
You know, I think it's really helpful if you think through in a very, like, unfiltered way. Just imagine getting ripped off. Okay? Let's say you work for 2 weeks on one goddamn drawing. Okay? And then somebody comes along, and one day you come in and you see that drawing, maybe photograph and print it somehow, not actually hand done, on a wall in somebody else's presentation, right? And let's say, make it even worse, you got trashed for that drawing. Now they're getting praised, right? Do you feel bad? Why do you feel bad? Do you feel like something was stolen from you? Why do you feel like it? You know? I think it's extremely illuminating to just think through this and try to think about like why you think you're right, okay? And it goes way back. I'll tell you one little thing, and you can research this a little bit when you have time. John Locke in 17th century wrote this thing about, it's referred to as the labor theory of value. It's one of the most bizarre one-pages I've ever read. He writes, in a state of nature, of course, nobody owns anything, right? Like, it's kind of like I own the atmosphere, I own the Pacific Ocean, you know, whatever. Yeah, I own that frog. Like, I mean, in a state of nature, there is no property. On some level, all private property is some kind of weird invention or even a form of theft, perhaps, right? Right? So in this state of nature, in the commons, how do we turn things into property? That's what he wanted to figure out. So he says, well, who would argue with this, that we have rights to our own person, to our bodies, right? Right? Nobody owns nature, I suppose, but we all own ourselves, don't we? You know, slavery is unnatural, blah, blah, blah. So, if I go out and chop down that tree and plane it, you know, and build a chair, I'm infusing it with the labor of my person, with my body. Like, my body is being poured into this thing that no one owns. But it's because I own my own body, my own labor. I extract that tree from a state of nature and thereby turn it into my property. He actually says this. And, you know, it's really bizarre when you read it, but it's a pretty interesting argument. And guess what? Within 50 years, okay, in the early 18th century, Queen Anne in England uses this argument as the basis for the very first copyright legislation called the Statutes of Anne. It's really interesting. Because before then, right, what's like a poem or Shakespearean plays, nobody owns, you know. It's all in common, state of nature, open source, right? Right? It's like, no, like this person worked really hard on it. It's their property. All right, once you say that, you can say, okay, if this is yours, you could sell that property to this person in exchange for money. Why do they do this? Because the publishers of Shakespearean plays, the first folios, wanted to be able to have exclusive rights so the other competing publishers would not be allowed to publish it. So the ones that were buddies with Queen Anne could get the monopoly. So This whole business of intellectual property was invented. However, Foucault goes even further and said, no, it has nothing to do with money. The only reason, and he pulls up historical evidence for this, the only reason Queen Anne went for this and invented, at that moment, the concept of the author, insofar as the author is the owner of the authored work, right? In exactly the way you're talking about, okay? That's my drawing. I worked hard, that's mine, right? The only reason Queen Anne did this was so that she could have the ability to censor certain forms of writing. If I don't know, and this is Foucault saying, this isn't me, and he's right, Foucault's always right, and as much as I hate it, and saying, in order to censor, we need to know who wrote it. We need the person attached to the work. That's the flip side of this. Right? So Foucault ends that famous short essay, What is an Author? By saying the concept of author ends up being the evidence of how frightened Western societies are about the uncontrolled multiplication of meaning. Yeah. And it's like, wow, you know. So, like, this kind of shit, I wonder sometimes, maybe not such a bad thing.
That's a pretty amazing place.
I'm sorry, there's a poor guy that's been trying to get a question in for half an hour.
Thank you. You talked about the non-collaborative nature of working with AIs, and I'm glad this came up because then you compared it to slave labor, and I feel like there's an element of conscience that relates to human slave labor or the lack of it, and I wonder how you trace that into this kind of labor.
No, I mean, I don't mean it metaphorically, I mean it literally.
Okay.
Absolutely literally. I mean precisely that these machines of automation have absolutely no rights to the work. That's all I mean. So I'm not even using negative connotations of the word slave on a metaphorical basis. I mean it quite literally, like dictionary definition. No rights. Yeah.
But then the writers, the scripters, or the writers of the software, that's the big, in that side.
Yeah.
They're all laying claim to it.
Yeah, they will eventually. But it's going to be a battle because they can't lay too much claim because then no one will use it. So it's always been a funny trade-off for software writers about how to allow it to be adopted while also preserving their interests. So this is why also software is protected by copyright and not patents. They argue that software is a form of writing. That's not an invention or contraption machine, but it's a form of writing. And so they get much longer protection, but then it then results in the scenario of when I use software, I'm basically borrowing rights to that software, per use. But then what I make with it is then not owned by it. So like if I write a novel in Microsoft Word, Microsoft doesn't own my novel, you see. But because I wrote my novel and I have a copyright to that novel, it doesn't mean I own Microsoft Word too. Yeah. This is going to be a lot of fun stuff to sort out in the coming years.
All right, should we call it? Thank you, David. Thanks.